Back in 2011, there was one CPU that was seen as future-proof investment, and that processor is i7-3930K, popular among overclocking enthusiasts, gamers, content creators, and even scientists, because of its multi-core processing power. Of course, I'm not a scientist, but I know how to test CPU performance, and I wanted to know how big or small investment is this low-cost 6-core CPU. Now small talk about what exactly the CPU have under the hood. So this CPU was released back in late 2011, same date as LGA 2011 socket was released. This processor have Sandy Bridge E architecture, and as I mentioned, this i7 is based on LGA 2011 socket. The CPU have 32nm process node, 6 cores and 12 threads, base frequency of 3.2 GHz and turbo frequency up to 3.8 GHz and TDP of 130 watts. Kinda low spec processor for 130 watts, right? Wrong. Why? Well, because you can overclock the CPU so far that only limit is your cooler. But that's another story for another video. Oh, and I put 64 gigs of DDR3 RAM to test maximum memory bandwidth. In other words, I just had spare sticks of RAM. Why not use them all? And I paired this processor with GTX 1080 Ti. So now let's see how it performs. But before that, I will say that even the CPU have turbo frequency to 3.8 GHz, it's still in heavy load will turbo only to 3.5 GHz. It's some kind of Intel safety feature, so don't be afraid guys, who still rocks this CPU. Your CPU is not broken. Okay, so first I wanted to see how it performs on Cinebench R23, and i7-3930K multi-core performance was 4760 points, and single-core performance was 681 points. i7 performance was similar to first generation of Ryzen 5 processors, and as for second benchmark, I choose to run 3D Mark TimeSpy on 1080p CPU test, and processor scored 4338 points. But this time, score was similar to second generation Ryzen 5 processors. But now, let's go straight to the point. CS2 I run in 1080p medium preset, and the average FPS was 74.6, minimum was 51.6 FPS, and for maximum, CPU get 131.8 frames per second. I'd say pretty good experience. You can even play CS2 competitive if you wanted. And now I launched Forza Horizon 5. Little bit longer loading screen, but that's expected with DDR3 memory. Forza in 1080p medium preset and FXAA turned on for sharper graphics. Average frame rate was 76.1 FPS, minimum was 52.4 FPS, and maximum was 85.7 FPS. If you don't get bothered by longer game startup, then you can get this CPU for low as 20 euros and play Forza Horizon 5 on enjoyable graphics. Next was Fortnite in 1080p medium preset and games set to DirectX 12. CPU averaged 79.4 frames per second, minimum was 38.4 FPS and maximum was 119.9 FPS. I don't know what happened in Fortnite, but i7 struggled every time match start till landing from the bus. Otherwise, little bit stutters here and there while in fight. But I think all this is fixable with little overclock. Okay, I will stop teasing you about overclocking the CPU and launch PUBG in 1080p medium preset. Matter of fact, the CPU didn't struggle in PUBG even when you are in close combat or hot dropped right away. Average frame rate was 98 FPS, minimum of 52.2 frames per second, and maximum was 192.4 FPS. But for those who like roleplay games I launched GTA 5 in 1080p, ultra and very high settings, basically in highest graphical settings possible. In GTA 5, average frame rate was 77 FPS, minimum was 53 FPS, and maximum was 116.7 FPS. Not bad for 13 years old CPU. Next game was Apex Legends, in 1080p, high settings, and VSync turned off. Average frame rate was 95.3 FPS, and minimum was 72.6 FPS, but maximum was 122.9 FPS. Nothing to add here, just that game ran without any problems or stutters. Now next in line was Rainbow Six Siege, in 1080p, Ultra preset. Average frame rate was 152.3 frames per second, minimum was 110.5 FPS, and maximum was 202.2 frames per second. Rainbow Six Siege, also same as Apex Legends, ran without any hitch. Up next was Shadow of the Tomb Raider, in 1080p, highest graphics preset, and in DirectX 12 mode. Average frame rate was 116.9 FPS, minimum just 78.4 frames per second, and maximum was 157.5 FPS. I just enjoyed this game so far that I forget that I benchmarking processor. At the end, this processor still is the warrior, and will give some sweat even for modern GPUs. But in my experience, i7-3930K was little bit bottlenecking with GTX 1080 Ti. But my prediction is that it will change after you overclock this CPU. Of course, first you need adequate cooler to cool 130 watts. But for stock frequencies, I was positively surprised how well Intel's stock cooler was performing. After all these tests, I will say that i7-3930K still is a good investment for creative apps or moderate gaming experience, if you spend maximum of 40 euros for it, of course, or 80 euros for motherboard plus CPU combo. And of course, if you don't mind little bit higher electricity bill. But now, thanks for watching and subscribe, or otherwise I will not be able to pay for electricity.